I coordinated the movement of human organs across international borders. When a heart stopped beating in Munich at 3 a.m., I made sure it was pumping in a chest in Boston by dawn. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred. Every shipment I handled represented someone's last chance at life. The system I'd built over 5 years could route a liver through 3 countries while navigating customs, temperature controls, and legal requirements that changed by the hour. I wasn't just good at this work. I was the only person in our company who truly understood how all the pieces fit together. The software, the contracts, the relationships with hospitals, they all ran through me. My team called me the guardian angel of logistics. I wore that title with pride, even though it meant my phone never stopped ringing. Bryce arrived on a Tuesday in September, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He'd been hired as director of operations after our previous manager retired. Within his first week, he called logistics just shipping stuff from point A to point B. He told our morning meeting that he'd streamlined operations at 3 Fortune 500 companies and planned to trim the fat here too. I watched him scroll through his phone while our senior coordinator explained how we'd saved a kidney shipment from spoiling in Dallas. He looked up only to say, "Sounds like we're overcomplicating simple processes." My stomach dropped. This man had no idea what we actually did. He saw spreadsheets where I saw lives hanging in the balance. In October, I caught a massive compliance issue. Our automated system was routing shipments through a facility in Nevada that had lost its federal certification 3 weeks earlier. If we'd continued, we could have lost our license to operate. I prepared a detailed report for Bryce, showing him exactly how close we'd come to disaster. He barely glanced at it. "Tess, you're creating problems where none exist," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The system works fine. You just need to trust the process and stop overcomplicating my vision." I tried to explain that without the manual checks I performed, the process would have cost us everything. He cut me off. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I asked you to do your job." November 15th. I'll never forget that date. Bryce summoned me to his glass office overlooking the city. He didn't ask me to sit. Instead, he slid a paper across his desk. "This is a restructuring notice," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Effective immediately, you're being moved to an entry-level associate position. Your salary is being reduced by 40%. The room tilted. "What? Why?" I managed to ask. He smiled, actually smiled. "You need to learn that you're replaceable, Tess. You've been acting like you run this department. This will teach you some respect and remind you of your place in the hierarchy." My hands shook as I picked up the paper. 40%. Had a mortgage. Student loans. A life built on that salary. I should have walked out. I should have thrown the paper in his face. Instead, I signed it. My hand moved across the page like it belonged to someone else. Bryce watched with satisfaction. "Good choice," he said. "Your new desk is by the restrooms on the 2nd floor. Clean out your office by 5. I moved my things in a cardboard box while my former colleagues pretended not to notice. The desk by the restrooms smelled like industrial cleaner and humiliation. But as I sat down in that terrible chair, something shifted inside me. The shock began transforming into something sharper, colder. I opened my laptop and started reading through old files I hadn't looked at in years. Bryce had made a mistake. He just didn't know it yet. That night, I pulled up my original employment contract from 5 years ago. I'd negotiated it carefully back then, fresh out of my master's program but confident in my worth. Page 7, Section 3, Paragraph 2. There it was. Key personnel designation. Because I'd built the proprietary routing system from scratch, the contract classified me as essential infrastructure. Any change to my role, title, or compensation required board approval and 60 days notice. Bryce hadn't gotten either. He just unilaterally decided to demote me. But there was more. Section 5 detailed the software licensing agreement. The routing system I'd created wasn't owned by the company. It was licensed to them, with renewal terms that required my quarterly signature as the system's architect. Bryce clearly hadn't read my contract. That was his second mistake. Monday morning, I arrived at my desk by the restrooms at exactly 9 o'clock. I did precisely what my new job description required. Data entry, filing reports, and answering phones. Nothing more. When my old team asked me to check the weekend server logs, I politely explained that entry-level associates didn't have those permissions. When the system flagged a routing error, I forwarded it to Bryce's email and marked it for management review. For 5 years I'd been working 60-hour weeks, checking systems at midnight, catching problems before they became disasters. Now I worked exactly 40 hours. I took my full lunch break. I left at 5 o'clock sharp. Felt strange at first, almost wrong. But I reminded myself, Bryce wanted an entry-level associate. He was getting exactly that. By late November, cracks started showing. The automated routing system I'd built had always needed human oversight. It was powerful but not infallible. It required someone who understood the nuances of international medical shipping to catch its mistakes. Without my weekend checks, it began routing supplies incorrectly. A shipment of O-negative blood meant for Seattle ended up in Sacramento. Organ transport containers were dispatched without proper temperature verification codes. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the foundation was crumbling. I watched it happen from my desk by the restrooms. I filed my reports. I did my data entry. And I waited. The system I'd maintained so carefully for 5 years was starting to fail, exactly as I knew it would. Bryce still hadn't noticed. December 3rd. My desk phone rang. "Get up here now," Bryce screamed. I took the stairs slowly, arriving at his office 5 minutes later. He was red-faced, jabbing his finger at his computer screen. "The entire routing system is glitching. Fix it." I looked at the error messages calmly. They weren't glitches. They were warnings I would have caught weeks ago if I'd still had access. "I'm sorry, but entry-level associates aren't authorized to access the root directory," I said quietly. "You'd need someone with system administrator credentials." His jaw dropped. "You're the one who built this system." He nodded. When I was senior logistics coordinator. My new position doesn't include those permissions. You'd need to contact IT to restore my access." He stared at me, finally understanding what he'd done. But his pride wouldn't let him admit the mistake. I started using my lunch breaks differently. The calls began in mid-November, right after my demotion. Meridian Global Solutions had been trying to recruit me for 3 years. They were our biggest competitor, and they'd always known my value. Now I finally took their meetings. I met their CEO, their operations director, their legal team. They offered me everything Bryce had taken away, and more. Director of International Logistics. Twice my original salary. Full creative control over building their medical transport division. But I asked them to wait. I had a plan that was bigger than just switching jobs. If they trusted me, I could deliver them something far more valuable than just my expertise. I could deliver them my entire company's logistics operation. They listened carefully. Then they smiled and asked what I needed. December 10th. I sat in a law office downtown while my attorney reviewed the documents I'd brought. He was a specialist in employment contracts and intellectual property. After 2 hours, he looked up with something close to awe. "This is ironclad," he said. "They violated your contract in multiple ways. But the software licensing clause, that's your nuclear option." He drafted a formal notice and sent it via registered mail to our company's legal department. Not to Bryce, to the actual lawyers who handled corporate compliance. The letter explained that my demotion had invalidated the software licensing agreement. As of January 15th, the company's rights to use my proprietary routing system would expire unless the contract violations were remedied. I never expected them to fix it. I was just creating a paper trail. Everything needed to be perfectly legal. The quarterly review was scheduled for December 20th. It was the company's most important meeting, where department heads presented results to the owner. Bryce had been panicking for days. I watched him through the glass walls of his office, frantically reformatting slides and running printouts. He was trying to hide the disasters that had been piling up since November. Rerouted shipments, client complaints, system errors. He'd been blaming them on software bugs and market conditions. Now he had to present those failures to Mr. Vanderhaas himself. I'd never actually met our billionaire owner. He only appeared quarterly, arriving in a black car with tinted windows. People said he'd built his fortune on identifying inefficiency and eliminating it without mercy. Bryce was practicing his presentation at his desk, his voice carrying through the office. Cost savings through strategic restructuring. December 20th arrived cold and clear. Mr. Vanderhaas walked through our office at exactly 9 a.m. He was 70 years old but moved like a man half that age. His eyes swept across the space, taking in everything. People straightened in their chairs. Conversations died mid-sentence. This was a man who'd built $1 billion empire by valuing one thing above all others: efficiency. Waste offended him. Incompetence enraged him. I'd heard stories about managers who tried to hide problems during these reviews. They didn't work here anymore. The boardroom filled quickly. Department heads, senior staff, and me, sitting in the back row in my entry-level associate chair. Bryce noticed me and frowned, but he couldn't exactly kick me out. Mr. Vanderhaas took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said. Bryce stood and launched into his presentation. He had charts showing reduced payroll costs, graphs indicating streamlined operations. He spent 10 minutes discussing his strategic restructuring initiative, which was apparently what he was calling my demotion. By right-sizing our workforce and eliminating redundant positions, I've saved this department over $200,000 annually, he announced proudly. Mr. Vanderhaas listened without expression. Bryce continued, clicking through slides that showed carefully selected metrics. Everything was framed to hide the disasters. Client complaints were feedback opportunities. System failures were platform updates. Late shipments were adjusted delivery windows. I watched from the back row waiting. Bryce advanced to his final slide, a summary of his achievements. He reached for his coffee, smiling confidently. Then the screen went black. The projector died first. Then Bryce's laptop screen flickered and went dark. He jabbed at the keyboard, confusion spreading across his face. Around the table, other laptops began displaying the same error message. Software license expired. System access denied. The routing system had just timed out. The 60-day warning period my lawyer had provided had ended at midnight. Without my quarterly renewal signature, the proprietary software I'd built had automatically locked everyone out. Bryce's face went from confused to panicked. He tried rebooting his laptop. Nothing. Mr. Vanderhaas leaned forward slightly. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. That quiet tone was somehow more terrifying than shouting. Bryce's hands were shaking as he fumbled with cables. "Just a technical glitch, sir. We'll have it fixed in." "It's her fault," Bryce suddenly shouted, pointing at me in the back row. Every head in the room turned. "Tess is the one responsible for system maintenance. She let this crash happen. She's been incompetent ever since I restructured her position." The room fell silent. I felt everyone's eyes on me. This was the moment. I'd been preparing for this exact accusation for 5 weeks. Mr. Vanderhaas looked at me directly for the first time. His gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "Is this true?" he asked. I stood up slowly. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "I wouldn't know, sir. I'm just an entry-level associate now. I don't have server access anymore. I haven't had system permissions since mid-November when I was demoted." Pause. "Perhaps you should ask whoever Bryce assigned those responsibilities to after my restructuring." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mr. Vanderhaas turned back to Bryce. "You demoted your senior logistics coordinator? The one who built our routing system?" Bryce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I watched him realize in real time that he'd never actually reassigned my responsibilities to anyone. He'd just assumed the system would run itself. She needed to learn respect, Bryce finally stammered. She was overstepping her position, questioning my decisions. So you decided to teach her a lesson, Mr. Vanderhaas finished, his voice still terrifyingly quiet. During our busiest quarter, without board approval, without ensuring system continuity. Bryce was sweating now. I could see the stains spreading under his arms. Mr. Vanderhaas turned back to me. Would you please come forward? He paused, realizing he didn't know my last name. That stung, but I was about to make sure he never forgot it. I walked to the front of the boardroom. Every step felt like walking through water. When I reached the conference table, I pulled something from my pocket. My new ID badge. I placed it on the table in front of Mr. Vanderhaas. He picked it up, read it, then looked at me with new interest. Meridian Global Solutions, he read aloud. Director of International Medical Logistics. The room erupted in whispers. Bryce's face went gray. As of 2 days ago, I confirmed. I couldn't continue working in an environment where I was undervalued and disrespected. Meridian offered me a position where my expertise would be appreciated. Mr. Vanderhaas set down the badge carefully. I see. And the system failure. I met his eyes steadily. The routing software was licensed to this company under the terms of my original employment contract. When Bryce violated that contract by demoting me without proper authorization, the licensing agreement was invalidated. I provided 60 days notice to your legal department. However, I continued, Meridian Global Solutions has acquired the licensing rights to my software as part of my employment package. I placed another document on the table. They're prepared to offer your company a management agreement. They would take over your entire logistics operation, ensuring no disruption to service. The terms are quite generous, actually. Mr. Vanderhaas picked up the proposal and began reading. His expression never changed, but I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the pages. Bryce finally found his voice. You can't do this. You can't just... I can actually, I interrupted. I did. The software was always mine, licensed to the company. It's all in my original contract, which apparently nobody read before deciding to demote me. I looked at Bryce directly for the first time. You taught me that I was replaceable. I decided to prove that you were. Bryce stumbled backward, grabbing the edge of the table for support. His face had gone from gray to ash white. He finally understood what I'd done. By demoting me, he'd triggered a clause that surrendered the company's rights to the software that ran their entire operation. And now that software belonged to their biggest competitor, who I worked for. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I watched him process the reality. I wasn't just his former employee anymore. Meridian's management agreement meant I would effectively be overseeing his department's work. I would be reviewing his performance. Every shipment he handled would go through systems I controlled. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. He literally swayed on his feet and dropped into his chair before he fell. Someone gasped. Mr. Vanderhaas set down the proposal and looked at Bryce with something beyond anger. It was cold calculation. The door opened. My lawyer walked in right on schedule. He'd been waiting in the hallway. Good morning, he said pleasantly. I'm here to clarify the legal situation. He placed his briefcase on the table and pulled out a thick folder. When Mr. Bryce demoted Ms. Tess without board approval, he violated Section 3.2 of her employment contract. This violation invalidated the software licensing agreement under Section 5.7. The company received formal notice on December 10th, with a 60-day remedy period. That period ended at midnight. He pulled out another document. Additionally, by characterizing Ms. Tess as replaceable and demoting her to teach her respect, Mr. Bryce created a hostile work environment, which further violates the key personnel protections in her contract. He looked at Bryce. Your company no longer has any legal right to the software that runs your logistics operation. Meridian Global Solutions now owns those rights. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. I walked out of the boardroom and headed toward the elevator. I heard footsteps running behind me. Tess, wait. Bryce caught up to me in the hallway, breathing hard. Please. I was just trying to motivate you. You were getting too comfortable. I thought. I pressed the elevator button and didn't look at him. You thought you could treat me like garbage because you had the power, I said quietly. You thought I'd just accept it because I needed the job. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. You taught me something valuable, Bryce. You taught me to respect myself too much to stay in a place that doesn't respect me. He started to follow me into the elevator. I held up my hand. You should get back to the boardroom. I think Mr. Vanderhaas wants to speak with you. The doors closed on his stricken face. I heard the news 2 hours later. Mr. Vanderhaas had fired Bryce during an emergency board session. The official statement cited gross negligence in contract management and failure to maintain operational continuity. The real reason was simpler. Bryce had cost the company its entire logistics infrastructure. Within 48 hours, Meridian's management agreement was finalized. My old department would continue operating, but now under Meridian's oversight, which meant my oversight. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just felt tired and relieved and vindicated. The following week, I visited the office one last time to collect some personal items I'd left behind. People stopped me in the hallways. Some apologized for not speaking up when I was demoted. Others asked if Meridian was hiring. I was kind to all of them. None of this had been their fault. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor where my old office had been. I wanted to see it one last time to close that chapter properly. But when I reached the door, I stopped. The nameplate had been removed. Through the window, I could see construction crews renovating the space. I asked someone walking by what was happening. Oh, they're turning it into a consulting suite, she said. For the Meridian contractors who'll be working on site. My old office, the place where I'd spent 5 years building something extraordinary. It was being transformed into workspace for my new company. I pressed my hand against the glass, smiling. Bryce had tried to shrink my world down to a desk by the restrooms. Instead, he'd pushed me into something bigger than I'd ever imagined. The universe had a sense of humor after all. That evening, I stood in Meridian's downtown office, looking out at the city lights. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made my breath catch. In 3 months, I'd be launching Meridian's new medical logistics division, built on the foundation of the system I'd created. But this time, I'd have the resources, the respect, and the authority I'd always deserved. My phone buzzed. A text from my new CEO. Board approved your budget. Build something amazing. I thought about Bryce's words that day in November. You need to learn that you're replaceable. He'd meant to diminish me, to put me in my place. Instead, he'd taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. I wasn't replaceable. I was essential. And I was finally working somewhere that understood the difference. Sometimes the worst thing someone does to you becomes the best thing that ever happened. Bryce had tried to teach me respect. He'd succeeded, just not in the way he'd intended. I'd learned to respect myself enough to know my worth and to walk away from anyone who didn't see it. That lesson was worth everything that came after.